All right, good evening. Or as used to be said, good evening. Wednesday evening, we're having a good time. Today is the 17th, and it's 6 o'clock, so it's nice to have everyone here. I always like to express gratitude to the people that bring food, and so whoever brought it tonight? Crystal bought it? Beautiful. Nice. For those of you watching online, we applaud for a lot of things, but especially food. So, all right, why don't we start off with prayer, and we're going to dig right into the Word. Have a lot of really good things. We're going to be covering two chapters that are either really confusing or really weird. And so we're going to hit both of them tonight. And there's a lot of good stuff in it. Just wanted to let you all know. So let's bow our heads in prayer. Father, thank you for this wonderful day that you've given us. Lord, you are a very good God. You provide for us. You take care of us. You give us instruction and direction. And Lord, one of the ways you do that is through your word. And so as we go through these verses tonight, I pray that we would be able to see you, hear you, have understanding, and Lord, the wisdom to apply it to our lives. Lord, I pray that any and all distractions would be removed and that we could in all ways focus in on you. We thank you again because, God, you are an amazing God, that you would love us just the way we were. And as we're going to read a little bit later, how you've made an incredible contract, covenant with us that it's just amazing. And so we thank you for this evening. We bless you and give you praise. Amen. Okay. I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. We are now in Genesis. Just in case you're wondering what I'm doing, I use all these little tags so I can write on it instead of writing in my Bible. But it does, unfortunately, cover up some of the words. So, all right, I'm going to back up here. It's good to see you guys. You guys look awesome. You can come over and hug me if you want to, Chris. Just say hi to the camera as you do it. This is my buddy, a long time ago. Okay, so, pardon me? I want us to start in chapter 14. And there's some things about this that we're going to look into, but not as deeply as I want to the latter part of the chapter. But let me go ahead and start reading. This is the setting that we're in is right after Abraham and Lot separated. Just to give you hopefully only about a 45-second recap, Abraham, Sarah, and Abraham's nephew Lot moved from the city of Ur. I don't know why I like saying that, sort of goofy. But they traveled up to Haran, came back down where the Canaanites lived, and that was to be the promised land. And God was protecting them. God asked them, Abraham, just to get up and go. He did it, and there were blessings after blessings that and promises that God gave. And then Abraham had a senior moment, and for some inexplicable reason went out of God's will down to Egypt because there was a famine in the land. And we don't read anything about him praying or anything. He just went down there to get food. Seemed a logical thing to do, but it was a catastrophe. And so they made their way back up. During that time, Lot and Abraham continued to accrue wealth. And so as they came back from Egypt up north into the promised land, they went back to where they started and had first set up camp. And then the word says right here in chapter 13 that Lot's crew and crops couldn't inhabit the same land because they were both really huge. And so they separated. Abraham gave Lot the choice, and he went down to the other side of the Salt Sea, Sodom, and Abraham stayed right where he was. And God gave promises all the way along. But I want us now to go on in chapter 14. And I'm going to just start reading. About this time, war broke out in the region. King Amraphel of Babylonia. That is an important name to know, and I'll show you probably in the next couple of weeks or so. But I don't know if you've heard of the Hammurabi Code. It was the first written code of conduct, ethics, and it was all very well and good, but his other name was Amraphel. So this Hammurabi, if you want to look at it later, just interesting, you can do that. But Amraphel of Babylonia, Arioch of Elasar, King Chedorlaomer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goim fought against King Bera of Sodom, and then the king of Gomorrah, king of Admah, king of Zeboim, and the king of Zoar. Now these are 4 of the 5 cities, not to get way ahead, but just to let you know in advance, these are 4 of the 5 cities that get destroyed by the fire and brimstone. And we read mostly about Sodom, but these other 3 cities were annihilated also. So just hold that in your mind. When we come back to it several chapters later, you'll remember that there was this battle. And verse 4 says there were 12 years that these 4 cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah, were subject to King Chedorlaomer. But in the 13th year, they said, we've had enough. We don't want to do this. We're through with paying tribute, and whatever the tribute was for each town or city-state, they would pay whatever. If they had gold, they paid gold. If they had silver, they had silver. If they had grain, lobster, livestock, then they would pay a portion of that. Well, they got tired of it. They didn't want to do it. And so 1 year later, Chedorlaomer and his allies arrived. He said, what he did, Chedorlaomer, he said, I am not going to mess with this. He swooped in, and it says that he and his allies arrived and defeated the Rephaites. I practiced that and still couldn't say it. And for those of you that remember, these are the giants, okay? The people of giants. This is actually the first time that the Rephaites are mentioned in the Bible. And so, anyway, they defeated the Rephaites, the Zuzites, the Emites, the Termites, the Horites. I'll tell you what, you have to take more time trying to say these words than anything. But they, as far as the edge of the wilderness, and they were overrun. We read that that these rebel kings went against him, and they were quickly taken down. And what was really unusual, and this is again something you have to remember, you might underline it, but it says that these 4 kings from the north came down and swooped over the 5, and actually on their way back took care of some other cities. Just, hey, let's get some more. And so they did it. But look at verse 10. It says, as it happened, the valley of the Dead Sea was filled with tar pits. Underline that because it's really important. Tar pits, some say just petroleum products. And you know that area of the Dead Sea. Have you ever been anywhere near that? Okay. A lot of petroleum. Yeah. Actually, you know what? If you go to the Dead Sea today, you can find this. They called it bitumen in the Bible, or tar, but there are bitumen chunks floating in the Dead Sea to this day. And so they fled. Some of them fell into the tar pits, while the rest of them escaped to the mountains. The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and headed for home, taking with them all the spoils of war. And that's just what happened back then. That's how they gained wealth. That's how they either destroyed these city-states or just made them subject to their holdings, maybe made the kings vassal kings. I mean, there's just a lot of different things they did. But the verse 12, and this is all, I know I'm sort of speeding through it, but what happens after this is interesting. It says in verse 12 that they captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and I talked about that. Was that Sunday? Can anyone remember? Sunday. Okay, Sunday. Abraham's nephew in Sodom, and carried off everything he owned. In case you weren't here Sunday, or you didn't hear this Sunday, when Abram and Lot split up, Lot went down towards the other side of Jordan, which was really fertile land. It was green, a lot of pasture land. And Lot he said, that's what I want. It just so happened that Sodom and these other evil cities were right there in the middle of it. And at first it says that Lot camped there. And I'm not going to go back over that, but the word says he just camped there. But then he moved into there. And so verse 13 tells about one of Lot's men escaping, and he went up to where Abram was, at the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Ammonite. The Amorite, sorry. The area that I was talking about is that map, and I don't know if you remember, I showed it to you, but it was a Google map of these oak trees of Mamre. And when you look at it, you can see where those trees were. It's not disputed at all that was the place. It's called Mamre. And it was just really interesting. You can see that. You can use Google Earth and find it. But this one of Lot's men escaped, and he went up there to talk to Abraham, but also Mamre was there, Eshcol and Aner. They were all allies. When Abram heard about this, what do you think he did? Well, he was an idiot. He chose the wrong place. Just let him go. No, he said, hey, let's go. We're gonna get him back. And so if you take a look at this, Abram did 2 things, and we read about it. If you look at any of these notes down here, it says a lot of good things that I really leave to you to read. But on page 33, if you're in this Bible, which I do still encourage everyone to get it, that's what we're using. You don't need it to be able to go through the Bible study. But we have a note here that says that we find out a couple of characteristics about Abraham concerning this situation with Lot being taken prisoner. He had really come more to age, and he was very confident and for God to take care of things. I'm going to let you know, Abraham was just a regular man. He followed God, but he also did some dumb things. and he's not the only one. I think we all could raise our hands, which I won't have you do, but I have done my fair share of dumb things in my life. Why are you nodding your head so good, Chris? Because you know it's true? You and me. Oh. The both of us, okay. So he also, not only was he in a position to go and he took the offensive, but he also was prepared for it. Evidently he had been or had someone training his men, and it says that he mobilized, this is the latter part of verse, or the first part of verse 14, he mobilized just 318 of his men. They were in his household, and long story short is they went, chased him down, got Lot back, and God gave him success. The thing I like about this, we don't know how many men that these other four kings had under his authority, but I'm going to say if these were large city-states, countries, they had a whole lot more than 318. But the word of the Lord, the word says it's not by might nor my power, but by my spirit. And we can go and win even under possibly overwhelming circumstances. You think about David versus Goliath, this little barely teenager against a 9-foot man. You read about other times that Israel was overwhelmed, and the Lord just totally took care of the enemy to where Israel ended up not having to do anything except, as the word says, watch the salvation of our God. And this is a point that I just want to point out to everyone here and those watching online. Don't ever think that you are without resources, that you're alone. Now, you might be physically alone, or you might just feel that you are alone and don't have any close friends or allies. But when God's on your side, you have the advantage. Every time. There is not a time that, if you're trusting in God, that you are on the wrong side of a battle. So, here's where I want us to read something interesting. I'm just going to read it, verse 15. The one thing I've noticed about this is the writing is really small. And so, please forgive me when I do this. The army was chased up all the way to Dan, and you may not know where that is, but that was the northern extent of what the promised land was going to be. That was, they wiped them out, and Abraham, in verse 16, recovered all the goods that he had taken, and he brought back his nephew Lot with his possessions and all the women and other captives. We now read something that I think is maybe for tonight one of two or three extremely things to remember. We're going to see a godly man choosing the right thing. He was given two options, okay? And the first one was this. In verse 17, after Abram returned from his victory over Kedar-Lamar and his allies, the king of Sodom, okay, this wicked city. And by the way, it was, if you don't know about it, Sin City today holds nothing over it. Okay, it was a very wicked place. All these places were. And but the king of Sodom went out to meet Abram in the valley of Sheba. And so we read this, and here's the king of Sodom going up to meet Abram. And again, this is where his nephew Lot lived, down in Sodom. And so he's approached. Then all of a sudden, boom, we read, and, verse 18, Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which, by the way, Salem is now the current day of Jerusalem. Okay, I was wanting to give you a chance to. Okay, so when you read Salem here, it was Jerusalem. The word goes on to say that Melchizedek, the king of Salem, Jerusalem, and a priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abraham with this blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies. And then Abram turned around and gave him a tenth of not the booty, the loot, but he gave him 10% of everything that he had, including what he had just gotten, but what he had already had. I want to stop there a second, because these simple 5 verses is the only time we read about this man Melchizedek other than Psalms and in Hebrews. And I have a couple of scriptures we'll look at, but this man Melchizedek is a mystery, okay? There's not a lot known about him, okay? In fact, I'm going to read you just the top 10 list. No, this is a list of things about Melchizedek. Only 3 books of the Bible mention Melchizedek. The most informative is the one in Hebrews. The New Testament says more about Melchizedek than the Old Testament. Number 3, Melchizedek is a contemporary of Abraham. Melchizedek, number 4, has no recorded family. There's no, this person had this son, and he had this son, and, here's Melchizedek. And then he was priest of God Most High. Melchizedek, number 6, gives blessing, at least one, to Abram. Melchizedek, number 7, is the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem. Number 8, Melchizedek's name means king of righteousness, okay? So Melchizedek equals king of righteousness. 9, the order of Melchizedek is royal and everlasting. And then last not least, Melchizedek was greater than Abram and Aaron. And we'll read about all these things. But I think it's just a little bit odd that we read of a man who the word says was more important than Abram and Aaron. And I can't help but wonder, if someone is that important, why is this all we know? Why is this the end? And there's a lot of reasons why. Down below in the comments, there's several things that I want to read. He was a God-fearing man. His name meant king of righteousness, and the king of Salem. And anyone want to know what the king of Salem means? King of peace. So not only was he a king of righteousness, but he was a king of peace. Who does that sound like? John? That sounds like Jesus. Now, there are certain groups that think that Melchizedek was Jesus, and we don't know. We can speculate. But he was priest of the Most High. If you want to look at, someone turn to Hebrews 7, 1 and 2. I think I have this right here. And I don't. Anyone have it real quick? Hebrews 7, 1 and 2, and then hold on to it, because I'm going to have you read 3 in just a second. Anyone got it? Okay, Shell, nice and loud. Pretend you're yelling at Danny.
For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned a tenth of everything. He is he is the first by translation of his name, king of righteousness, and then he is also king of Salem, that he is the king of peace.
Read also 3. Go ahead.
He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither begotten
Okay?
He's the only priest king.
Yeah, actually, God later on said, if you're king, you can't be priest. If you're priest, you can't be king. In fact, I'm trying to think back, was it Uzziah? I'm trying to think. Whoever I'm thinking about was king, and he decided to take on the role of priest. And again, it was a bad call because God said, don't do it. And this is just one of those things. We hear a lot. It's always been about our country, about the separation of church and state. And this is this concept here. But Melchizedek was the one and only one that held that position. And we don't really know why. The only things that we can speculate at is that, number one, and I'm still looking at the notes below, Melchizedek was a respected king of the region. Abram was simply showing him the respect he deserved. And that'd be logical. Okay, he was in the area, and Abram had achieved a lot. And after being blessed by Melchizedek, he went on to do other things. The second thing that we can look at is that Melchizedek was a type of Christ. That's verse 3 that Shell just read. A type is an Old Testament event or teaching that so closely resembles what Christ did that it illustrates a lesson about Christ. Whatever this is, it's something that is important, was important, is important, because God made a point that these 5 or so verses were put in here, but we don't get any more. We read in Psalms, and it escapes me right now, it's like 102 or something, but it talks about as in the priesthood of Melchizedek. And then in Hebrews we read about it. But God doesn't give it any more, and I don't know what to think about that. It's obviously important, but we're not given anything else. Shelley, I don't know if you have an answer to that question, but you did raise your hand.
Not so much. I mean, I do believe he's a Christophany. I truly, myself, believe that was Christ Jesus. It was the second Yahweh.
And that happened often,
Right.
more often than,
quite a bit.
yeah.
Dozens of times. But I can't think of another time in the Word where somebody gives a tithe other than to the temple. Like a tithe goes to God. It like every time you give somebody else their fair due in whatever. But I cannot, and maybe I'm overlooking something that's possible, but off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody else
No.
that a tithe is given to other than God.
Right. Just by the way, the action of tithing, this was long before it was established by God.
Hundreds of years.
Yeah, a long time before.
500 years at least.
And for him to do that, and Melchizedek to be called a priest and king, it's long before God had even mentioned it, but here it shows up. Would anyone care to venture out and give me your thoughts? By the way, there's food over here if you all want to eat. Anyone have any thoughts?
I have another thought.
Okay, Shelley has another one. Marcia, you always have good thoughts. You have anything? You're dry? Okay, for a little bit. All right, Shell?
It's also a foreshadowing of when Jesus is going to rule from Zion as both the high priest and again the king. And Zion is Jerusalem. It is the holy mountain. It is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And if you read Zechariah, you'll see, I don't know, to me the seed of Zionism, all of God's promises of when Jesus is going to rule the world from Jerusalem.
Right.
It's almost like from the foundations of the earth, he had a plan.
Right.
Oh.
Well, needless to say, this godly man showed up on the scene, and just as quickly as he appeared, he disappeared. and that's all we know. I have my own theory, and I'm going to talk about it later on, but actually I could talk about it from, I used his name, it says Amraphel, about Hammurabi. But I might make that another little side thing later on, or I might just write out a little paper and have it on my document web page. But I think that one of the main things here, it shows that God was in action and was establishing all these things long before it was spoken to Moses, long before it was a topic of learning for the Jewish people. And I think it's important to remember that God didn't wait and let people go by the wayside to live a life without God. He always gave them an opportunity. And we're going to read this in a little bit in the next chapter. But I want to go on to the last part of verse. We'll look at 21, okay? And then we're going to go into 15. This is a lesson that everyone will want to pay attention to, okay? This is a really good lesson. Verse 21, the king of Sodom, remember who had been standing there waiting for Abram and Melchizedek to do this, all right? It's sort of like a tombstone where, Marcia, help me out, where the guys are talking and that one guy, Johnny whatever, and Doc says, "Oh, Johnny, I didn't realize you were still there." Is that right? That's right. Anyway, if you don't know the movie, then that means absolutely nothing. Yeah, you may leave now. Sodom, the king of Sodom was standing right there, and then look at this, and pay attention to it. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give back my people who were captured, but you keep for yourselves all the goods you have recovered." Abram replied, verse 22, to the king of Sodom, "I solemnly swear to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take so much," underline that, "I will not take so much as a single thread or a sandal thong from what belongs to you. Otherwise you might say, I am the one who made Abram rich." Verse 24 goes on to say that Abraham said, "I will accept only what my young warriors have already eaten, and I request that you give a fair share of the goods to his allies that are mentioned earlier in the previous chapter, verse 13. That's interesting. He didn't take it. He was offered it, and a lot of people would have taken it, but he didn't. I ask a lot of questions. In fact, I have on my iPad here just questions that I like to toss out, but my immediate one in this is why? Why didn't he take it? Why didn't he take it? That was the thing that kings do when they win. They take something. Chuck? No?
I'm just thinking, I'm listening to you.
Okay. Again, anyone that wants to speak, come over to the mic. He did not take it. Now, we get a little bit of a reason right here, but I want to show you that in the next chapter, there is something else going on. And these two are just right next to each other. Abram did not want, I'm going to read it one more time, for Sodom, the king of Sodom to say, "I will not take as much as a single thread, because I don't want you to go around saying, I'm the one who made Abram rich." Abram had trusted God to leave Ur, to go and stay in Haran, to go and set up at the Oaks of Mamre. Totally blew it going down to Egypt, but came back up, trusted God by splitting the land. And I've said this now 2 times, but Abraham wasn't just generous saying, Lot, you take whatever land you want. Abraham was Abram. I just ought to just give up and say Abraham. But Abram was also trusting in God. And I think the easiest, if I were to translate this transaction, it was, Lot, take whatever you want, and I'll take whatever's left, because God's going to bless me wherever I go. He already promised it to me. And I want to make that something of a point, because whenever we trust in God, He will lead us to the right place. He will lead us to the place that He wants us to be, where we'll be effective, where we'll be productive. And I believe that Abram, when he was talking to this king of Sodom, was just not wanting to have any part of it. Because God was wanting him to trust fully, 100% in him. Wanted Abraham to just totally put his trust in him. And I believe that's a problem for a lot of people today. Believers, we know about God. We read about God. We've heard about God. We talk about God. We believe in God, but we don't always believe God. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
There's a big difference between believing in God and believing God. Okay, Marshall, do you mind strolling over here or talking really loud?
Can I just talk really loud?
It'll have to be really loud.
I'm really loud.
You're really loud.
I read a book a long time ago called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's an interesting little read. I don't know why. I really liked it though. And one of the things that the author said was that he had a father that was, that he did not have a very lucrative salary, I guess, and their lifestyle was rather on the poorish kind of side. But he always spent time with his best buddy and their family, and they were rich. And so he always called the other guy, his buddy's dad. He always called him dad, and he always called his dad dad. So he had rich dad and he had poor dad. That's the way the story goes. And he said that one of the things that he began to notice as he noticed the difference in lifestyles between his rich dad family and his poor dad family were at simple things, like even at dinner. He said that at dinner, when the poor dad family like went out to eat and they would bring a basket of rolls, everybody grabbed, like right away, grab. He said that when he went with the rich dad, that didn't happen. They might select one, whatever. And the reason for it is because the rich dad kids knew there was a plethora, an abundance of rolls back there someplace that they could have, and they didn't feel the need to grab. Abraham has that rich dad mentality. Not that he's necessarily rich, but that he knows that God has the abundance and can give it to him as he wills.
Yeah.
And his mentality is just like beyond anything. I wish I had that kind of level of faith.
Right.
I really do, because he just thinks like the rich dad family.
Yeah.
And he doesn't feel the need to grab and hoard and hold on to because he doesn't have, because he knows that God the Father does have and can give to him.
The funny thing about Abram is that he was wealthy. He was one of the wealthiest people in the area. But he was not relying on that wealth. What you started off saying we're going to look at in chapter 15, verse 1. The first three words here say sometime later. Other versions say after all this happened, and it was all the stuff that happened with the 4 kings of the north going and grabbing the 5 kings of the south and chasing Lot and bringing them back, and then this conversation between Abram and Melchizedek with the king of Sodom watching. Anyway, this here is making a point of that. After all this, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, "Don't be afraid, Abram." Now, God had been leading him all the way, but this is almost like a statement saying that, okay, watch out, because there's going to be something that can be very terrifying, and indeed there was. But God said, "Don't be afraid." And I can't think how many times in the Bible we read where Gabriel appeared to Mary and says, "Don't be afraid, fear not." He went to Joseph, the angel did, and we read over and over, I think the shepherds on the hillside. I should just have Googled "don't be afraid" in the Bible and find out. But it's a lot. But God said this to Abram, and here's why. "For I will protect you and be your reward, and your reward will be great." Okay? Now we're really talking about, with the king of Sodom and God, 2 types of rewards. King of Sodom was saying, "Hey, look, you did something good for us. I want to give you a reward. I want to give you something to pay you back." And Abram said, I don't want anything to do with it at all. But then God turns right around and says, "Don't be afraid, because I will protect you, and your reward will be great." And God was/is that reward. All right? If we remember that God is our reward, that He is what we get for putting our faith into Him, then we're going to have a good life. But when we don't look at God as a reward, something to be treasured, something to be valued, something that we desire and want to put all of our trust and faith in God, if that's not the way it is, then we're going to be like the king of Sodom, offering us things. And how many have ever, and you know it, had offers, but it was nothing than a ploy of the devil? Hasn't that happened to anyone? It's happened to me a couple times. I'm hesitant to say it, but it's a good example. When I was in college, I was recruited, long story short, to go to Las Vegas, and I was going to be an arranger and a band leader for a new motel going on the Strip. And chance of a lifetime for a musician. I mean, that's just, you don't turn that down. And I've had people say, "Oh, you're just making this up." No, man, I have teachers that were mad and maybe still are at me because I turned it down. But they were going to pay me $5,000 a week. Now, this was in 1979, 1980, $5,000 a week. That's $20,000 a month. How many of you would like to make $20,000 a month? Yeah, I could go for that. But I could tell that wasn't something from God. And I had my main instructor said, "Ben, you cannot do this." He said, "You're the only one I know in this entire university." And he said, personally, of people I know that has ever been offered this position and you turned it down, you cannot do this. But I told him, I said, "You know what? I just know it's not the right thing to do." And God has turned it around and done really good things and provided for us. I don't make $20,000 a month, and may never make $20,000 a month. but that's okay, you know? God's provided for me and my family, and, you know, I'm a pastor of this church, and God's blessed it, and all you guys are my family, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Huh? Oh, yay. I thought you said why. Think about how much you could be tithing to the church. Can I tell you this? If I'd have gone that route, I'm not sure I'd even be a believer. There's something in me thinks I might, but I don't know. You are around that kind of stuff 24/7, and I just don't know. But that's not the point. But I have learned, and when I read this, I thought, you know, God is our reward. And we think winning the mega millions and the jackpot and you know, publisher clearinghouse, all that is what we're looking for. But God's saying that, you know what, I am your reward, and what I have for you surpasses anything that you can ever go for, anything that you can look at. Then Abram responded like he had done several times. God is reiterating the promises that I read to you and listed them in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. I don't know if you made any notes there, but you can look back. But in this little section right here, God re-emphasizes the promises that he made. But Abram said, "Oh, sovereign Lord, what good are your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, my Eliezer of Damascus, a servant of mine, will inherit all the wealth. And he says it again, you have given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." I'm going to detect a little bit of like, okay, God, you're saying this, but, you know, when I got out of Ur, you made good things happen. When I got down into the city of Mamre, God did good things. When I got back up here, you have provided more wealth and more blessings, and that I can even count. Except you told me that I was going to be a father of many, and right now there's no way it's going to happen. It can't happen. I don't have an heir. And this time, man, I love this. In fact, I wrote a song with these words in it, or sort of like them. But it's funny how you can be looking for something to say and you're just on totally the wrong page. Verse 4, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your very own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up in the sky and count the stars if you can. I like those little words of God. It's sort of like, yeah, give it a shot. Just try it. Shell?
There's something that doesn't translate well from Hebrew to English right there. And he's not just saying count the stars. He's saying, can you number the stars? Can you tell the brightest star, then the next brightest, then the next, and the next, and the next? He's saying, can you order the stars? Can you put them in the right order from brightest to... I mean, that's a very cool statement.
Yeah, it was sort of like God letting Job have it in Job chapter, was it 37, 38, 39, something like that. Job was doing much about the same thing, maybe a little bit more so, but complaining to God about all the things that happened to him. And God said, okay, listen, young man, sit down. I have something for you. But this was a little different in that I don't think Abram was necessarily complaining. I just think it just wasn't matching up. God, you've said this, you've done these other things, but the main component in what you're saying, it's not happening.
Well, wouldn't you have a conversation like that with your dad? If your dad had promised these things and you're like, okay, well, I
Right.
things you do for me, but I'm still childless, and you said so. I sense impatience.
Right.
Well, I would be. Heck,
Yeah.
I sense way more patience than I am capable of in this man.
But the Lord took Abram outside, said, "Look at the stars, count them if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." Now you have to remember at this time, Abram's about 80 some odd years old. Okay, he's not young. He was 20 years older than me. Can you believe I'm in my 60s? I'm 60. I'm closer to 70 than 60. That's sort of depressing. What?
I'm just being snotty. You know me.
Not only those of you online, but I'm curious what Cassie said, so
You're closer to death than birth.
I'm closer to death than. Watch, I'm going to live longer than all you guys. Look at the first 5 words, at least in this translation, of verse 6. And Abram believed the Lord. Underline it. Abram believed the Lord. He had seen some sort of proof of everything before, but he had yet to see anything in a solid way that would lead him to believe it. But this is why Abraham is the man of faith. He blew it at times, but he was a man of faith. He believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. He believed the Lord, and he was made righteous. Not just counted, he was made righteous in God's eyes, just simply because he believed. I want to stop and make one more point, but I do want to hurry because I haven't gotten to the part I've really been aiming for. But we need to believe not just in God, but we need to believe God. And I'm going to be saying that for a while because that's a very good statement.
And they can't just be with in your head.
No.
In your head you believe, or in your heart you believe. No, because your actions back up what
Right.
is going on in your head and your heart. And that's why Abram at the time was able to say to the king of Sodom, I don't want your soiled
Yeah.
goods. I'm okay, man.
He knew somehow God was going to make it happen,
Well,
even
he
at that
acted
old
on
age.
it. There's
Right.
an action there. No, it's okay. I trust God. God will provide whatever. You take your things.
Now, here comes the interesting point. And if I don't get totally through, can I ask for about 5 or 6 more minutes tonight? I usually try to be done right at 7, but it might be 7:05. All right? Melissa, put your timer on. This next thing that goes on is one of the weirdest things, at least for us, that you'll have ever read. It's just downright odd. And for us now, these days, this doesn't make any sense, no sense whatsoever. And it's talking about the contract, covenant, but I'm going to call it a contract between God and Abram. And this contract, boy, the way they did it back then was amazing. But let me just read it, and then I'm going to go from just reading to tell you some things. It's first of all starts in verse 8 by saying, "Oh Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" It's a good question. How can I be sure? And look what God did. The Lord told him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." So Abraham presented all these to him and killed them. Now, we don't get it, but this is something that Abram, he immediately knew what was going on. Nowadays, when we have a contract, Cindy and I went and bought a house, and the contract stated that we're going to be getting this house with this and this and this and blah, 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 and here's the inspections and all this, and we are then going to pay a certain amount for this. We'll pay this much a month, and all these things. It is then put on paper. It's reviewed by a lawyer. Many times contracts go to an officer of the court. They're recorded, and that's how we do it. Okay? This was not at all that. It was the same concept, but it was a whole lot more. Abram then, after he killed these animals, first of all, he presented all of them to him and then killed them, and he cut each animal down the middle, laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Then some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. So if you can imagine this, God said, here's what I want you to do. Go get these animals. And all of a sudden, Abraham was like, I got you. I know what you're doing. I know what we're going to do here. Okay? And Abram said, get these animals. Abram just immediately went and got them, killed them, cut them in half, and he basically laid them on either side. You know, half are here, the other half here. But there was a walkway, an aisle through the middle. And this was done a lot. Okay, this was the way you had a contract in these days. It says, as the sun was going down, verse 12, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, and just put it a little back, not on the back burner, but just move it back just a little bit, and remember that he fell asleep, and there was a terrifying darkness. The Lord said, you can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. That had to on itself make Abraham like, okay, now wait, I didn't hear any of this stuff so far. So far, all you said was get up, get out, leave. And then you're going to provide me with all these promises. But this was terrifying to him. You know, his descendants. And it's going to be for 400 years. But I will punish the nations that enslave them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. This won't happen for 4 generations until they return here. For the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction. Now, I preached on this. I just took this phrase a couple of weeks ago. But right there, that shows us the amount of grace and mercy and patience God has for us. We must think of God as a patient God, and remember the verse from the New Testament, he's not willing that any would perish, but that all would come to repentance. Now this mentions here about the sins of the Amorites not yet warrant their destruction. Let me put it to you this way and see if this tracks. God knew that the Amorites were horrible people doing horrible things. And they were going to continue to do it, and he was going to continue allow them to do it. But you think about those 400 years. God said, I'm going to give these guys 400 years to make it right. Now, that's patience. It wasn't, okay, I'm giving you guys a week, and if you're not right, boom, you're gone. It wasn't a month. It wasn't a year. It was 400 years that God was patient. And if you ever wonder if God loses his patience with you, that you've gone too far, you've done too much, and that you've blown it beyond what God can do, wipe that out of your memory and just think about this. God gave the Amorites 400 years to make it right. They didn't do it, by the way. It says then in 17, after the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking fire pot and flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. I really would like to know what that was, you know, a flaming pot. I have no idea.
We call it an orb today.
Well, it could be lightning, but make no mistake, whatever it looked like, that was God walking through the halves. Okay? Are we good on this so far? All right. Hold on, this is going to get really good. So God, I'm going to say it, God passed between the halves of the carcasses, and the Lord made a covenant with Abraham that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants all the way from the border of Egypt, and you're going to overwhelm these Izites, the termites and the parasites. But what was going on here? I have several things I just want you to look at and read. I'm going to read it to you. There's a man named David Barone, and he said this: according to ancient Eastern manner of making a covenant or a contract, both the contracting parties passed through the divided pieces of the killed animals, and it was symbolically attesting that they pledged their very lives to the fulfillment of the arrangement that was being made. So this was part of the covenant. Man, I should have talked faster. Look at Isaiah. Pardon me, look at Jeremiah. Everyone turn to Jeremiah 34:18. Okay, if we can hold on here, I'm going to try to wrap this up. Can you all give me 3 more minutes? Jeremiah 34:18 says, and he was talking to Israel, he says, because you have broken the terms of our covenant, of our contract, I will cut you apart just as you cut apart the calf when you all walked between its halves to solemnize your vows. Okay? So you can see this was done. Here's, in a nutshell, what it was. These cut pieces were going to are symbolic of something. When God walked through those pieces, here's what he was saying. And I wish I wasn't having to go through as much, but if we have any questions, we can go on again next week just for a little bit. But in essence, what God was saying, and when he walked through, the covenant that God was making was saying, I make these promises to you, and I'm making a contract. This is our contract. If I fail in any of these promises that I've promised you, if I fail in even one, then let me be split apart like these animals. Let me be cut to shreds and ripped apart. That's how serious I am with you, Abram, that I am not going to fail you. I'm not going to fail you one bit. Now, as I read earlier, in contracts, it was usually both parties going through. If it was the contract for buying my house, it would have been me, it would have been Cindy, it would have been the bankers, all these people, and we would have all walked through those carcasses saying, if I fail in any way, let this happen to my body. But God put Moses, Noah, Abram, God put Abram in this dark sleep. I think it was to partially, paralyze him. Maybe that's not the right word. But he was aware of what was going on, but he could not move. Now, God went through that covenant alone. Because what he was saying is, even if you blow it, even if you fail in this contract, I'm still going to come through.
And this is why Israel is still God's firstborn today.
Because that
it doesn't matter if a Jew is good, bad, or excellent. God cut this covenant by himself, and he is faithful to his word. It will endure.
Yep.
So anybody who has ever wondered if the church has replaced Israel, this is how you know it has not.
This is a contract that has not been revoked or repealed. This is something. Now, I really feel that we are beneficiaries of this, because it states about the the nature of God.
Well, and the nations are blessed through Abraham.
Right.
Again and again and again, the word tells us that. So absolutely.
Do you know that, and here's my last statement. Do you know if Abraham would not have been immobile, maybe that's the way of saying it, hey Daniel, if he wouldn't have been immobile, Abram, because of the nature of the contract, would have jumped up. He saw this and he knew what was supposed to happen. He knew that God was going to go through, and then he would have jumped up and said, I'm going through now. But guess what? Abram wouldn't have made it a day or two where he would have failed that contract, and then boom, that's it. God kept him from moving. God made it a point to say, it is me. This is basically a one-sided contract. I am going to do this for you. And because I'm unchanging, I'm not going to fail. If I were, let this happen to me, but it won't. Now, I don't know about you. I think that's cool. It shows the serious nature of who God is and what he has for us and the way he loves us and protects us and keeps us. And the scripture in Hebrews says, I will never, ever, and never, ever, ever leave you or forsake you. Read back on this and let it be a reminder. God does not go back on his promises. God does not break a contract. And that's where we're going to stop tonight, at the end of... Is that because I'm stopping? We'll start in 16 next week. But I would like for you to do me a favor. I haven't really said this so far, but would you go read the first part of, well, actually all of Genesis 15. Read it again with what I told you, and then just think about, if you do nothing else, think about that all week long, about God's love and the contract he made for us. Amen. Let's bow our heads in prayer. And Chris, again, when you're here, I'd like to have you do something. Would you mind dismissing us in prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day that you blessed us with. And Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your promises and your mercy and your love. And we just pray as we go out the rest of this week that your light will shine through us and that we'll be a blessing to someone in our communities. And we just love you. And again, thank you for your love. In your personal name we pray. Amen.
Amen.